A new military agreement between the United States and Colombia has raised concerns in Latin America. Leaders want to know why the United States is escalating its military presence in the region. Now, the Colombian government says that more U.S. troops would help fight drug trafficking and combat terrorism in South America. But not everyone is keen on these plans. Venezuela's Hugo Chavez came out and said that these bases will provoke military conflict in Latin America, and he feels that this is just a way for the United States to control the flow of resources in Colombia. Well, Eva Golinger is a Venezuelan-American author and attorney. She's in Caracas right now, and she joins me via Skype. Thank you so much for speaking to me. So, according to the Colombian government, this agreement is a good thing. It's going to stop drug trafficking, stop terrorism. So why is Chavez so against this?
Well, there has been an ongoing escalation of military presence in the region on behalf of the United States over the past 10 years through Plan Colombia. We're talking close to $10 billion overall in investment by the United States government in these efforts to thwart drug trafficking and production in Colombia and to fight against leftist guerrillas in Colombia. Nevertheless, what we've seen over the past 10 years is actually an increase in drug production and drug trafficking, particularly between Colombia and the United States. So what's become apparent to most in the region is that Plan Colombia really doesn't have the objective of addressing directly the war on drugs, but actually is more a plan of the United States to establish a very present military force and power in the region in order to secure its control over this region's natural resources and strategic resources. And we know, for example, Venezuela is one of the major oil-producing countries in the world, and that certainly the United States government has its eye on controlling these reserves in Venezuela. And under the leadership of President Chavez, the supply to the United States of oil has not been stopped or slowed down, but certainly is no longer the priority of Venezuela to just supply the United States.
Okay, but they want to put these bases in Colombia, not in Venezuela. So why is Chavez kind of getting in the middle, ardently opposing this? They're not going to be in his country.
Well, Colombia is a neighbor of Venezuela. It's a very close neighbor, close ties economically, socially, and culturally. But also, we're already talking about a strong U.S. military presence in Colombia that's been built up over the past 10 years. You know, where the U.S. already occupies 3 military bases in Colombia, 12 radar sites, has on site several thousand U.S. Between troops and different officials of the armed forces and law and security from the United States are already operating in Colombia. We've already had incidents coming out of Colombia directed towards Venezuela and directed towards another neighbor country, Ecuador, on behalf of Colombia, that have formed a part of what the U.S. calls preventive warfare, attacking so-called leftist rebels that have spilled over the borders into the neighboring countries. And so there's a great fear that this level of increase, we're talking occupying 7 more military bases, naval bases, army bases, air bases in Colombia for a so-called war on drugs. It's too excessive of a U.S. military force and presence to just be addressing the issue of drug trafficking. And what's become apparent to Venezuela and others in the region is that this is an effort of the United States to reestablish its domination and control in this region.
But, Hugo Chavez is one of the largest consumers of weapons in that region. So isn't this a little bit hypocritical of him then?
Actually, that's not accurate. Colombia has a much bigger, no, it's not accurate.
How is that not?
Colombia's war budget, defense budget is much higher than Venezuela's. Brazil's is over 10 times.
Well, having a higher budget doesn't necessarily mean that they're buying weapons with that budget, does it?
The difference, actually, well, they are buying weapons, but the major difference here is that in the case of Venezuela, Venezuela had an armed forces when Chavez came to power that was basically dysfunctional, that didn't even have tanks that were up to date or rifles that were modernized. And so Venezuela began to buy more arms to update more its military forces. And in fact, many of those efforts were to precisely fight against the drug trafficking and production coming out of Colombia and the civil war in Colombia that had has spilled over the borders of Venezuela throughout the past several decades. And then we have in the year 2006, the United States imposed a sanction on Venezuela prohibiting the sale of weapons and arms from the United States to Venezuela, based on what the United States says was an alleged link between Venezuelan so-called terrorist groups. And so Venezuela began to purchase weapons from Russia. And this is when we began to see this sort of blow up in the media, primarily from spokespeople in the United States, in the Pentagon, saying that Venezuela is starting an arms race in Latin America, but that's actually not true. Venezuela was forced to buy weapons from other countries because of the sanctions imposed by Washington, and had seen, as a result of this ongoing aggression coming from the United States, the necessity to ensure that at least the Venezuelan armed forces are equipped enough to defend their own territory.
Okay, very briefly, how is Chavez going to respond once those bases are set up there?
Well, it's the occupation of Colombian military bases. It's not the establishment of new bases. And so that's already a process that's underway. So our response, and from Venezuela and the people of Venezuela as well, is that this is an unacceptable military escalation in the region. There's absolutely no justification for it other than an aggression towards the peoples of Latin America. And I think people will continue to resist and protest those actions.
All right, thank you so much for speaking with us.